There's just 1 minute to showtime.
The engines are on.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
When they wrote up the systems and the rule set that we use, did working people get to write a line? What class of men on pen and paper jotted down their clues? With capital, the heart of their design. When 90 million want a thing, but some shareholders say no. Which class of people get to have their way? The people read the fine print, say that this thing has got to go, and we'll start writing a new contract here today. Don't you know that hundreds will work and one man keeps the money? They don't think they gotta tell us why. When they say the new social contract, all the bosses will be gobsmacked and everyone will want a sign. Oh, yeah, everyone will want a sign. Oh my goodness, I've emerged from the dark. Hello everybody, what is going on? Hello, by everybody I mean me and John. What's going on? That's my husband in the door. He is, oh yeah, I have my like super blurry portrait mode on, so he's a mysterious figure behind me. He's no one. No one knows who I am. But what's going on, everybody? Thank you for hanging out today. You will notice that Nicolette, our usual host, is gone this morning. They are all right. They are currently enjoying some birthday time where they are not working. They're doing what I should do and taking a day to just, I think they're painting. I'm excited to see the results of the painting. Hopefully, I need like a better word than like meditating, hanging out, not doing, recreating. As an American, I'm not unfamiliar with these terms. Okay. I don't intentionally have my camera pointed in a way where it just looks directly at my door, but that's what we have right now. It's where we are. It also allows me to look directly out my window, which is nice. Where we get this beautiful, natural light. Whoa, one side of my face is light. One side of my face is dark. Okay, what are we doing today? We're reading. We're reading books. That was all of the fun that we are going to be allowed to have today. We will now be checking out some literature. I continually pull from, because part of me is like, oh, I should read some Lenin. I should read through the manifesto today. But those things, it's not that I don't like that literature. I like it very, very much. I've spent a lot of time looking at it and thinking about it, talking about it with other people. It's that if you aren't already a little bit involved with the Marx or the Lenin, I would almost at this point say you can skip all of that and just like read Michael Hudson and you're gonna get it. Marx in Capital is writing about things that are relative today, but you're working through a few layers of like 1800s era, not obfuscation, just differentness. Like thinking about like the auto loom and stuff. It can be a little. It provides more mental barriers as opposed to like reading about World War II, which as Americans we do that constantly. We're always hearing about World War II and stuff and how it was the most important event in all of history. But I was trying to find like what chapter do I jump into to get the most done in its reading, and heck, we have nearly an hour if I stop talking and start reading, and what we'll be able to get through like a significant chunk of to get something out of. So I'm going to the chapter that's about the end of World War II. Hey, every American's favorite subject. Hudson also does a pretty good job of he like re-references back to stuff he already talked about. So if we talk about Bretton Woods, a phrase that if you throw it out to economists, they'll be like, "Oh yeah," it's like saying Woodstock. It's a thing they heard that's very very famous meeting that was pivotal in the direction that the current economic world has gone through Western history, through world history. Heck, it affects the entire globe. So let's talk about it. Going to talk about Bretton Woods, end of World War II, and the economic moves that have led to everything we have now. The very strange situation we have now with the U.S. being like the global hegemon, as has never happened in world history until the U.S. emerged as it is All right. Bretton Woods, the triumph of U.S. government finance capital. Oh, yes, please get in the chat if you have any comments, questions, or anything to say about this, because it's just going to be me reading. And if you give me something to actually talk about that you care about, that'll be better than me bloviating. All right, well, look at this. We're reading off John. He has a lot of, like, that's the thing. You'd be like, oh, this guy must be like some big commie if Jared's reading him. But no, Michael Hudson, he's like what you'd call a classical liberal, I guess. Like capital L. Like he thinks Keynes had great ideas. Talks about the same guys that like libertarians do, but he interprets them very, very slightly differently, critically so, though. So you see him pulling out these dudes from like the 16, 17, 1500s, these old school economists and non-economists. Essay on the State of England. This is John Kerry. Under a properly regulated system of colonial trade, England, standing like the sun in the midst of its plantations, would not only refresh them, but also draw profits from them. And indeed, it's a matter of exact justice that it should be so. For from hence, its fleets of ships and regiments of soldiers are frequently sent for their defense, at the charge of the inhabitants of this kingdom. Besides, the equal benefit the inhabitants there receive with us from the advantages expected by the issue of this war, the security of religion, liberty, and property towards the charge whereof they contribute little, though a way may and ought to be found out to make them pay more, by such insensible methods as are both rational and practicable. So this is him saying, like, those ungrateful American colonies. Don't they see all the stuff England's doing for them? It's funny. The course of world economic, it becomes ironic because then we just turn that on England, which is pretty great. We're like, look at these ungrateful Europeans. They should be sending us more of their money. The course of, is my audio okay? I have not even asked. Jeez. The course of world economic evolution following World War II was determined by the inter-allied wartime financial agreements and the post-war reconstruction debts to the United States. What began as a military contest between the Allied and Axis powers gave way to one in diplomatic meeting rooms among the Allies themselves, with the United States emerging victorious. We fought in the war, and then the Allies fought amongst themselves. In the closing days of World War II, the Allies' collective self-interest was at first enlightened. With the exception of the Soviet Union, no ally wished to burden the defeated Axis powers with reparation debts. Soviet Union's like, F them, they are paying, man. 20 million Russians. All right. The problem facing American diplomats was how to enable their allies and former enemies to maintain their imports of U.S. goods and services and to honor their prospective indebtedness to the United States in the absence of German reparations. In World War I, they were paying reparations, then they basically like hand those then directly over to the U.S. What was enlightened about U.S. policy was its recognition that this time it did not leave its allies without institutions capable of organizing and administering the anticipated growth and post-war debt needed to finance these purchases, the purchases of our exports, United States exports. It was primarily to solve this problem that the United States took the lead in forming the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. You see why I chose this chapter. To supplement German reparations as the mechanism through which to provide the Allies with institutionalized means to sustain their demand for U.S. products and to maintain the discipline of gold in international relations. Formal mechanisms were established to permit continued borrowing from the United States on much sounder bases than after World War I. The foundation of U.S. lending capacity was its enlarged stock of monetary gold, which had soared during the pre-war and wartime years. We'd been from World War I to about now just getting a lot of gold because a lot of people owed us stuff and we're stockpiling gold. So we're like, well, we can make loans out the ass. We have a ton of gold. I'm trying not to swear too much. Oh, hey, Zanny, did you get a job yet? The United States had learned the folly of overplaying its position as world creditor. It could not pursue commercial policies that were so aggressively successful that they would bankrupt foreign nations. That would only force them into retaliatory trade and investment policies that might foreclose long-term U.S. penetration of the world economy. For U.S. firms and exporters to be able to trade and invest in desired product lines, some payments reciprocity had to be guaranteed. Failure to provide this on private sector account by the rising level of foreign investment and or by U.S. imports would require its provision on U.S. government account, either as foreign aid or as military spending. The latter might be expected to be easier from a political point of view in light of Congress's traditionally narrow self-interest in most matters except those of national security. They won't spend anything except money on war, so politically you just get the war stuff through. It seems easy. The origins and international setting for the great increase in U.S. intergovernmental lending following the Second World War, thus were quite different from those of the previous post-war period. Not only were there no major arms debts or reparations to be paid, but the U.S. government made substantial outright grants via the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration. UNRWA! Remember them? You remember UNRWA? Gaza? Oh, they're still around. All right. During 1946 to 48, and through Marshall Plan aid during 48 to 51. It took the initiative in forming the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions to warn off a renewal of the economic warfare of the interwar period. It pressed for international laissez-faire under controls and for a return to by the world to the gold exchange standard, which it itself had abandoned in 1934. And that's when England showed up with the silver standard, sterling silver. Like, I mean, it already had that. Like, it was already doing silver as like its monetary, as its commodity money, I think you call it. Like, commodity money would be like gold. Because it's like backed in some way, like it's a commodity in and of itself, where we don't have that now. We have fiat currency, which is not commodity money, because you can't just take the money, and it's not like gold is a commodity in and of itself, where like a U.S. greenback dollar is no longer anything. Whereas it used to be a voucher for a certain amount of gold. And it still, I guess, technically is 1/3000th less than that of an ounce, like 137 something 4-digit number of an ounce. Time Traveler 2, what is going on? Thank you for being here. Happy 40th birthday to Nicolette. Indeed, I didn't know the exact year, but hey, happy birthday! I want to remind everybody this is good. This is my way of celebrating. We sit and we read a text. During the war. Is this highlighting, helping? Does it matter? During the war, its diplomats had come to recognize that given America's economic supremacy, a more open international economy would not impair the U.S. economy, but would lock the economic activity of other non-communist countries into a satellite relationship with the United States. It was unlikely that in the foreseeable future, foreign countries dependent for their reconstruction on the inflow of U.S. resources could interfere in U.S. domestic policies. Thus, where America had boycotted the League of Nations after the First World War as a threat to, as a threat to its domestic sovereignty, because it's like, if we join the League, you'll tell us what to do. It no longer feared multilateralism, but viewed it as an extension of U.S. influence over other countries' economies. The more wrapped up in our stuff, the more open and interlinked the post-war international economy became, the greater would the force of the U.S. diplomacy through the world. The greater would be the force of U.S. diplomacy throughout the world. So, like, this is where like, silly people who usually are a little silly will talk about globalism, the globalists. That's what this is. Like, this is what, that's the rational kernel, and talking about the globalists being this evil organization to fuck up the world. I'm doing Alex Jones here, obviously, but, like, there are people who have interest, who want to. The reason the U.S. is how it is, the reason the world is how it is because of what the more open and interlinked the post-war international economy became, the greater would be the force of U.S. diplomacy throughout the world. Like, the more dependent you are on Daddy, the more Daddy can tell you what to do, Zanny. But if you have your own money, you can break free of Daddy's influence, and that can only be done through getting a job. All right, this time around, the U.S. government did not extend unilateral credits to Europe and other nations. Sorry, I have a troll in the chat. Is what I'm goofing off here now. This time around, the U.S. government did not extend unilateral credits to Europe and other nations without forming new institutions to facilitate their repayment, and specifically their repayment in convertible foreign exchange. In July 1944, the IMF and World Bank, the greatest dream team we've ever assembled, were established at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Bretton Woods, I think, is like the place, Bretton Woods, and it's in New Hampshire. And they had a meeting. As permanent financial debt management consortia. Foreign governments held shares in these institutions, but not enough to match the dominating veto share held by the U.S. government. They thus could do little to control the use of the capital of these bodies, save to facilitate the servicing of their own indebtedness. Like, they can basically be like, oh, I'm going to work with the bank I have a very small stake in to decide how much money I'm going to pay to that bank. The U.S. economy was enabled to draw the finances of other governments into an international cartel directed by its own policymakers, dominated by U.S. officials and their appointees. You're all stuck now. All of our money's in one evil pot. You're all screwed. You all signed the devil deal, whatever, the monkey paw, blah, blah. Assuming the United States wanted its loans to be repaid this time, that was the proper way to go about things. Europe's post-war borrowing, because like the positive spin of that is like, well, if we're all connected, we won't want to start killing each other, like, and having wars, because we're all interconnected, and we will be hurting ourselves by doing that, right? Europe's post-war borrowing was mainly to finance reconstruction, and hence was self-amortizing to the extent that the projects it financed helped restore Europe's earnings base and gradually permitted an export surplus to be produced over and above the rising domestic consumption standards. Because the loans were for productive purposes, and because the organizations designed to ensure smooth handling of foreign debt service were multinational, the feasibility of U.S.-centered intergovernmental lending was enormously enhanced, promoting its influence over foreign economic policies and political decisions. Instead of giving the United States a continuing diplomatic advantage after World War I, its inter-ally claims had placed it in an awkward position of questionable debt instruments which it treated as immutable sums, never open to bilateral negotiation. By contrast, U.S. lending to European governments after World War II was accompanied by what resembled a gigantic multilateral Dawes plan. The IMF and World Bank were put in a position to recommend specific policies to be followed by their member governments in the interest of world financial stability. This stability was conceived of as an adjustment of foreign economic life to the needs and capacities of America. U.S. government loans, investments, and foreign policy thus were formalized into an institutional edifice of world economic domination. Since we're making all the loans, this is where we become the world's loan shark. It's happening, man. The result, but it's not even loan shark because we aren't trying to, it's like they're saying here, assuming that they intended for these debts to be repaid, because for World War I, it's hard to look at that and imagine that there was ever any actual intent for them to be repaid because it was impossible. It's like when you see like payday loans and it's like, oh, your interest is 10 trillion billion %. Like, clearly that's not a loan made for the intent of being paid back. It's a loan made for the intent of getting you in a debt trap. Like, haha, you owe me now. Like, that's the loan sharky part of it. It's like, we got him. Now we can like shake him down for money forever. Like, that's, but we don't actually expect repayment. It's that we want this debt to be so like because it's like a bomb that's in the room where like, oh, if you unsettle the system at all by trying to like gain sovereignty or assert your own national interest, like a country that isn't America, like assert your own national interest, like to improve your own stuff. That bomb might go off though. What's the bomb? Debt. It's a crazy system of debt that but these whole talk about like must be repaid, like. If you start messing with the sanctity of these debts, of these contracts, and be like, well, what if we just don't repay them? Well, that's the whole thing starts falling apart, doesn't it? That's why the Russian Revolution in 1917 was such a big deal. One of the things that the Bolsheviks did was they just knocked out all the debt. It's like, yeah, the Tsar owed you that money. We're not paying it. Like, we're not paying it back. We are just, sorry, debt, goodbye. We do not recognize those international debts anymore, and that's what caused the Russian Civil War, where like 7 different countries all invaded Russia at the same time. Because like, oh, we need our money, hurry, get in there and grab all the spoils you can. And then Lenin's like, surprise, we are actually a good army and we win. The Red Army beat you. Okay. The result was that the U.S. government claims on Europe and other foreign regions following the Second World War grew as rapidly as they had during World War I and its aftermath, but with no early threat of world financial breakdown. Hey, it's like, so they're like, okay, we set up the scheme again, but we had to soften it a little. You know when you're playing that game where it's you're supposed to like, it's like a virus simulation game, you're trying to like infect the whole world, but if you make it too deadly, they fix it faster because everyone goes, oh, this is really important, and like the world comes together and fixes the virus because it's too deadly. But if it's less deadly, they'll be like, that's what they've done with this. They've made their debt virus less deadly, so it seems like, oh, we can keep this going for longer. No threat of world financial breakdown. During 1914 to 24, total U.S. claims on foreigners had increased by 19.1 billion. Of this sum, 11.7 billion. These are like tiny numbers to us now, but at the time that was like most of the world's money. It was so much. 11.7 billion represented claims by the U.S. government on other governments as its share of the inter-ally debts. During 1945 to 42, U.S. foreign claims and investments again rose by 19 billion. And once more, most of this increase, some 11 billion, represented U.S. claims on foreign governments in the form of bilateral lending plus U.S. capital subscriptions to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. He points out that, like, look, guys, it's like the same numbers even. It's the same. It's just the same. Like, we just did the exact same thing. It's. So I look at this history stuff, the whole, like, history repeats, blah, 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 doom, repeat it, whatever. Like, you should learn about history because not that much has changed. It's been a while since we had actual change historically. We've been frickin' stuck in, like, third gear here forever. This time, however, Europe's repayments on these borrowings were managed in such a way that they did not exhaust international liquidity. Instead of simply being poured into the U.S. economy, thereby reducing capital available to foreign economies, loan repayments to the World Bank and IMF were recycled to replenish these organizations' loanable funds. The new arrangements maintained a pool of intergovernmental capital administered by an international consortium that quickly became a vital institution of world diplomacy, used by the U.S. government to finance a worldwide open door policy, and in the process that doesn't mean immigration, by the way, it's like and in the process to facilitate the breaking up of the colonial spheres of influence. In this way, the IMF, World Bank, G8. Every time I see "got," I read it as "gat," as in, and not like "girl your ass thick," which is apparently the new, like, weird. To me, "gat" is a thing that goes with, like, finger guns and. Never mind. And the U.S. like your GAT, your okay, and the U.S. foreign aid program. Oh, sorry, USAID. It's not what that is. It's a different thing. Became a formal system. Sorry, let me read the sentence again. In this way, the IMF, World Bank, GATT, and the U.S. foreign aid program became a formal system for the political implementation of American economic strength. Non-war, extremely coerced influence. Even before war was declared on the United States in 1941, the nation's economic and political strategy for the post-war period had been debated by spokesmen for its special interest groups. After Pearl Harbor, the discussion was elaborated in congressional hearings, policy pamphlets, public conferences, official speeches, and a myriad of periodical articles and books. The result was a broad agreement as to the aims and strategy of post-war American policy. We're reading down here. Oh, here, we're talking about books. We're going to read a footnote, everybody. Among the most important primary materials appeared, in chronological order, and they just lists a bunch of books here, The Fifth Fortune Roundtable, America's Stake in the Present War and the Future World Order. It's in Fortune magazine. That's the thing. We're like, you're a crazy conspiracy person, Jared. You believe conspiracy, fake, fantasy, fake things. And then you're like, it's just in the fucking paper. You can just read Fortune magazine, January 1940, issue 21, I guess. And they're like, the New World Order. And they'll just describe what has happened since. And they're like, conspiracy is right. It's like, it's just in the open. Because it's pre-internet. They didn't think anybody gave a shit. Like, nobody was just reading Fortune unless you're like a finance guy. Like, you don't care. And then we got a bunch of other ones. U.S. Department of Commerce, Economic Series 12. U.S. House of Representatives, Committee on Foreign Affairs, hearings on the Extension of Land Lease Act, blah, 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 blah. Oh, there's more. National Planning Association, America's New Opportunities in World Trade. More House of Representatives, Special Subcommittee, Post-War Economic Policy. Like, this wasn't secret. This isn't some secret thing there aren't lizard people or aliens needed. It's just normal. As Chapter 5 indicated, what was Chapter 5? One aim common to all groups in the United States was to avoid a post-war depression caused by reduced public spending. Because, like, you make a lot, there's a lot of spending in war. I mean, war's not, nobody was happy about war. War is good for most economies because stuff gets destroyed and you have to make more of it. So, like, in the capitalist mode, war is great because it uses up all the products you're making. And you end up without the crisis of overproduction, which isn't that we make too much stuff. If you make too much stuff and have no one to sell it to, like, that's how you get your Great Depression. Like, the employees can't afford to buy their own products. Like, that's the crisis of overproduction because it gets cheaper and cheaper to make stuff, but labor doesn't, like, it doesn't cost any less to buy an egg, even though it should. That's one of the issues with capitalism, is that it should be driving consumer prices down, but it doesn't because profits must increase. As Chapter 5 indicated, one aim common to all groups in the United States was to avoid a post-war depression caused by reduced public spending. The consensus in 1945 was that 60 million jobs were needed to achieve full employment. That's a lot. Like more? 60 million more jobs? That's a large percentage of the population in 1945. In the absence of spending and income sufficient to create these jobs, and of financing to underwrite their related corporate investment, a leftward shift might occur in American politics. They were scared we're going to go commie. Hence the national interest in full employment, despite its prospect of raising unit labor costs and consequent effect on competitive pricing of U.S. products in the world economy. That paragraph says that if it wasn't for the Soviet Union, we wouldn't have gotten anything nicer in the 50s through 80s. It was agreed that American acts because they feared peasant uprising, and it's always good. That threat never goes away, and eventually you're unable to appease the peasants, and they have their uprising anyway. It was agreed that American access to foreign markets was a precondition for full employment in the United States. The most obvious market was devastated Europe in its Reconstruction phase. We have stuff. They need to buy stuff. Buy our stuff, please. And not please that we have a GATT, as we talked about. We'll force you. The National Planning Association estimated, I thought planned economies were bad and communist. The National Planning Association estimated in 1944 that $10 billion in annual U.S. exports would be necessary to ensure full employment, particularly agricultural and heavy industry products whose output had greatly increased during the war. This round figure was generally accepted by discussants, but the U.S. private sector serving only the domestic economy was projected as falling short of this amount, given the existing forms and purposes of U.S. fixed capital investment. That's like buildings, stuff that can't be moved. Fixed capital. Not can't be moved. Stuff that's like a structure. We're variable capital. It's people. Labor is variable capital. There was no serious suggestion that the federal government supply this demand, either by military or civilian spending. The days of the Works Progress Administration, where that was just like a civilian, it was just like a guaranteed job thing. You're like, hey, I need a job. Like, sweet, we're going to have you go clear out this national park trail for money. Those days were long past, and military spending as a stabilization device still lay some years in the future. That's what we do now. The gap, therefore, had to be made up by expanding U.S. export trade. Which is, like, good, actually. Like, that's, hey, look at that. We're building an economy on fucking something. Like, we're making a thing and exporting it. You make a product and then you sell it. You know, capitalism. Actual capitalism. But such export production would be constrained if foreign countries insulated their economies to promote their own growth. And the greatest obstacle to American trade expansion was the British Empire, whose imperial preference tariff system would have to be dismantled. They give better prices to within the empire. Like if some rando African country buys stuff and they're part of the British Empire, they get nicer tariffs. Political pressures also existed in Europe and Japan to establish commercial autonomy. And then there was the less developed countries, which, in general, had been obliged to industrialize during the wartime disruption of trade and were likely to seek to protect the industries that had come into being during the more than 5 years of enforced economic isolation. As the Department of Commerce summarized the situation, during the interwar period, particularly during and after the Great Depression, foreign countries energetically pursued policies of industrialization and self-sufficiency. This development has been strongly accentuated by the enforced expansion of national productive efforts and capacities during the present war, and may lead to permanent loss of some of this country's export outlets for specific commodities. This must not be permitted to occur if U.S. exports were to be built up. You can't have a country be self-sufficient if you need to sell it things. We destroy people's... You see where we're leading to here, where we destroy people's local industries to then just be filled in by American industries, which take the form of like subsidized farm exports and stuff. How do you sell wheat to a country that makes all its own wheat? Backhanded spy shit. Economic coercion. Subsidizing wheat of your own wheat exports down to a price that undercuts domestic wheat production, which sounds insane, right? Like, how could it be cheaper to fly a piece of steel all the way around the world 3 times and then just make it here in Pittsburgh? And it's like, how can it? Well, my friends, we have reached what I'm going to call the coffee break here. It's a time where I take my coffee and I refill it. I also have my Kroger brand creamer. We're all about brands here. Here at the coffee break. Look, we're gonna do some of these. A little more. All right, that's probably good. My table is nowhere near my chair. Oh, don't drop this, please. Okay. All right, you ready? Nice. All right, I'm back. Chad, are you still alive? You never talk to me. Is it because Nicolette's not here? Not the time to be shy on me, Chad. It seemed probable that agricultural exports would be the first to be cut back if foreign countries' financial resources were exhausted in the post-war world. If new funds were not made available by U.S. imports of raw materials and other commodities, or by new U.S. private investment or intergovernmental loans. Oh, got a quote here. A low level of transactions between the United States and other countries would inevitably mean perpetuation of restrictive trade and financial controls abroad, and further development of bilateral arrangements among foreign countries to the exclusion of the United States. Foreign demand will not be evenly spread over all our export goods, but will be directed first toward types essential for carrying out programs of economic reconstruction and development. In the absence of a relatively plentiful supply of dollars permitting a greater measure of freedom, foreign governments will insist on exercising selective control over the uses to which the available amounts are put. Although various branches of industry, such as machinery and machine tools, automotive products, and aircraft, will be dependent on foreign markets to absorb their expanded output, the interests of agriculture are special. It is not as easy to establish for farm products technical superiority, such as that which marks our manufactured goods, and in general, farm products are subject to intense competition in foreign markets from other sources of supply. I swear I don't look ahead and ape the next paragraph I'm going to read, but I keep doing it. Is what I was just describing. How do you get agricultural exports? Because you just grow beans in your own field. Why would you buy them from America? American agriculture cannot hope to recover and maintain large foreign outlets beyond the obvious requirements of post-war relief, except within the framework of a large volume of international transactions. So, your options are to do this and become the big hegemon and keep this machine rolling to an extreme level for a bit. Or to end up with nationalized agriculture. You end up like the USSR with collective farming. And there are definitely issues with collective farming, but the successes certainly seem to outweigh the negatives. And if you just learn from the past and hey, this is a thing that made the collective farming situation in the USSR not work. It's well, then don't do that. And it's oh, okay. You learn from past mistakes and do it better because the core idea they're very good. You can't not have farming, and you can't do this weird unsustainable mega corpo farm thing where the corporations really control your food supply. These become a big teamwork activity that becomes largely automated and highly compensated. Farmers should be like if in the frickin' in Interstellar, where they're like this very important group of people because the world's running out of food and they can only grow corn. All right, Interstellar, go watch it. It's a little heard of cult classic, Christopher Nolan film. Okay. There are two principal ways by which this result may be attained, the study added, and these are not mutually exclusive, but rather are naturally complementary. One is by a renewed outflow of American capital. Because they also... It's a thing you don't think about, because you think of money as just money, but when you're doing foreign transactions, if you're America and you want people to buy your stuff, well, ideally, it would be the smoothest possible way would be if they bought it just with dollars. Like, they're buying American products, buy them with dollars, because that's what we use, and then, bam, look at that, transaction's done. Like, there's no international foreign exchange that has to be taken care of, etc. So how do we get dollars into the hands of these countries and then get them back? Like, we need to create, like, how do you create this cycle? Because how do you get dollars? You have to buy them. They're buying dollars with what? Gold! So then we get more gold, and that feeds into the whole, like, we're stockpiling gold shit from World War I. Like, that's the scheme here, is we give you dollars, you give us gold, we give you dollars, you give us dollars, we give you wheat. And then or corn, really, and then you just keep that cycle going, and eventually we have sucked all the gold out of your country. Your agricultural industry no longer exists because you're reliant on American exports, and then you're screwed. One way is by a renewed outflow of American capital, and the other is by positive measures to permit a larger volume of imports. Direct U.S. investment abroad was recommended as the most promising outlet for private American capital. Direct U.S. So you just privately start buying shit up in other countries. Particularly as the profit motive underlying the establishment of U.S. enterprises abroad tended to ensure their productivity, whereas loans floated by foreign governments were not subject to this test. Basically, if you run a business, you can be fucking ruthless and you're getting money, and as opposed to like a loan where you're just chasing somebody around like, hey, you should pay me. And they're like, I'm broke. Joint ownership of foreign affiliates with foreign nationals was also recommended. This expedient serves to nationalize enterprises financed by alien capital to reduce the friction commonly generated by absentee ownership. If you got an Italian guy co-owning your American-Italian enterprise, there's a lot less like, these Americans are coming in. It's like, no, an Italian guy did it. He's local. And thus deter movements towards expropriation and various forms of tax and other discriminations. Like, hey, we're going to have to tax these foreign businesses more. Given the fact of congressional protectionism, especially where special regional interests were concerned, the ideal way to supply dollars to the world seemed to be by direct U.S. investment abroad, as Stacey May of the National Planning Association pointed out to the House of Representatives in 1943. We will have this big accumulation during the war in funds and war bonds and savings accounts and so forth. I think then there will be tremendous investment funds in the United States. It was recognized that some U.S. government funds would be required to satisfy those situations in which private U.S. investment capital had little interest. Sure, we are going to rehabilitate them, announced President Roosevelt at a press conference in 1942, speaking of his post-war plans for foreign countries. Why? Not only for the humanitarian point of view, is that how everyone talked in the 40s? Why? Not only from the humanitarian point of view, you needn't stress that unless you want to. There's something in it. But the humanitarian point, there's something in it. But from the point of view of our own pocketbooks and our safety from future war, that's how you sell it, is like, look, if we're all connected, we can't kill each other because it would hurt ourselves. Which is funny because that's basically China's policy. It's like peace through trade, or it's if we get everybody wrapped up in our... it's the same idea, but the execution, instead of being done by private capital interests, is being done by a people's government led by a communist party. I don't know, call them communists, call them whatever the hell you want, but it's working. It was recognized that some U.S. government funds would be required to satisfy, to forestall protectionist measures being implemented against the U.S. export trade, and hence to oblige countries to buy their food from U.S. instead of local farm producers, and to deter foreign resistance to U.S. corporate investment takeovers, an open-door policy was required in both Europe and Asia. to induce other countries to adhere to the policy package of free trade, stable currency parities, general dependence on U.S. food and industrial exports, and to open their investment markets to U.S. private capital, American diplomats sought to provide foreign assistance. The price for this was the recipient countries would refrain from enacting protective tariffs or quotas or financial barriers such as competitive devaluation, multiple exchange rates, bilateral. These are all the strategies you can do to keep some country from just showing up and like economically like parasiting across your entire country like the U.S. has done over most of the world. Like there are measures you can take, but the U.S. is like, you're going to agree to not do that. And they're like, sure. Like we'll give you a better deal if you sign your life away. Like we freaking terms of serviced our way into this shit. The price for this, we'll refrain from doing all these things. And no blocked currency. Blocked currency meaning like you and a bunch of actually the euro is a blocked currency. They took all their currencies and put them in a block. But it was actually for our benefit. But okay, that's in the future. That's 90s. That's 2000s. The post-war world would have to move towards rules of fixed, they talk about the rules-based order, rules of fixed parities and open foreign, mainly U.S., access to national markets in order for U.S. producers to be able to adapt their activities to peacetime export production, and for foreign countries to adjust themselves to U.S. production and export capacity. You have to adjust to our export capacity. Britain, you're going to have to adjust to our export capacity so you can take more of it. Sounds weirdly sexual. Europe and Asia would have to relinquish concepts of economic self-sufficiency and reject a return to such policies by joining appropriate international organizations. Two sets of institutions were needed to implement these designs. One to ward off possible reversion to Europe's and America's nationalistic trade and financial practices of the 1930s, and the other to provide foreign countries with loans and other economic incentives sufficient to make tariff reductions positively attractive to them. American industry and agriculture would provide the physical resources for post-war European reconstruction and growth, and the U.S. government would supply the funding. For, unless dollars are made available with greater regularity than in the past, it would be both unjust and unwise to demand the removal of restraints and controls largely designed to protect the internal economies of other countries against external shock and pressure. In return, foreign countries exposed their economies to dependence on U.S. producers. Autarky was not a feasible policy. It would have entailed protracted poverty, unemployment, and most likely a political move to the left in most countries. They sit down and they're like, man, how hard can we squeeze them that they won't go to war against us? We have the Soviet Union right there. We have the Soviet bloc of all these countries who have essentially, that's because if you ask them, it's like, well, yeah, they went too hard too fast, and then these peasants, like, freaking, we failed to prevent a political move to the left in most countries. People forget, like, the way we think about this, it's not that, like, the Russians and the USSR, etc., just loved communism so much. They loved Marx so much that they just decided, you know what? We love Marx. We're going to do everything he said just because we like him so much. It's necessity. It's we are dying. Our people are miserable. Everything sucks. The Tsar is running rampant over our lands. There's open child prostitution was like a policy under the Romanovs. Completely fine. They didn't care. Like, shit was miserable. And born out of necessity, is they're like, hey man, we have an idea to like change all this stuff, and then they went along with it. Like when people talk about the Communist Party of China, the China part in the Communist Party of China is far more important to Chinese people than the Communist part. If communism wasn't producing the results that it is and has been for China, they would do something else. Like they do it because it works, not because they just have some particular fanboyish devotion to Marx, Lenin, and Engels. People have a move leftward if they are suffering from protracted poverty, unemployment, like starvation, etc. That's what pushes people to do things collectively, because they'll be like, oh wow, this just isn't working at all. We all got to team up and take it over, which has happened now historically a dozen times, if you include the really short ones, dozens of times. The post-war dynamic of U.S.-European financial relations stood in sharp contrast to the situation that had existed after World War I, when the circular flow had been from the U.S. private sector through the governments of Europe back to the U.S. government. After World War II, Europe's payments to the United States were principally for actual goods and services, not for reparations or inter-ally debts. a circular investment and trade relationship was again established, but this time European governments were lent funds directly by U.S. government agencies, U.S. official agencies, and the World Bank instead of by private U.S. investors. World Bank, IMF. These funds were used to pay U.S. private sector exporters, not the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. government budget recovered some of this money in the form of income taxes paid by U.S. exporters. The guiding logic was that full employment was required to ensure post-war political stability in the United States. They don't want us to go riot, and they remember Chicago back in the day. Even though in those days are still ahead a little bit. There's still plenty of labor shit that happens in the next couple of decades here. Foreign countries could not be permitted to offset their adverse productivity differentials by tariffs or currency manipulations. To prevent a protectionist response on their part, the United States took the lead in forming the International Monetary Fund to ensure a post-war system of fixed currency parities, and the World Bank as an economic incentive for countries to join the fund. Any nation wishing to join the bank had to agree to join the fund. If you want to be in the World Bank, you got to be in the fucking International Monetary Fund. And to service all its outstanding or future official government and government-guaranteed debts to foreigners. So, like, at its, like, the idea behind, like, the IMF and World Bank is good. Kind of, like, if you explain it in a certain way, where it's like, hey, man, remember having all these problems last time with everybody owing each other money? What if we all just agree to have this one, like, key? It's like if your roommate's in a house, it's like, all right, guys, we're gonna have, like, the money jar, and then when we all put money in the money jar, and then if, like, the roof collapses, we take the money jar and we pay for the collective expenses of all of us in the house. And that's how it's sold to people. And it's like, yeah, that sounds very reasonable. It would prevent fights because all the money's in one place. We can all look at it. Like, no one can be, if any money goes in or out, we all know. Like, it's a mechanism of trust. But that's like, now throw into that, one of your roommates owns the entire house, and he keeps the jar in his room, and and that's the United States. Like, oh, it's our money in our bank, except it's here, it's in my hands. Like, oh, you want to look at it? How much gold do you have? How much of our money is even still in there? All of it. Don't even worry about it. Trump, please don't go look in the Federal Reserve of New York to see if there's any gold there or not. A thing that you said you would do and then completely just acknowledge, memory hole, just gone. That never happened, actually. No one ever said that. No one ever tweeted that they were going to go see if the gold was still there, because it isn't. And that would fucking... that would cause some rifts, right? It's like, oh, we were lying about the gold we have, actually. And why does that matter? Not because it's physically gold, not because gold is some kind of magic, whatever. It's because we're only, well, not anymore, actually. We're supposed to be making our loans based on how much gold we have, because the gold is the commodity money. And all of the dollars, the greenbacks, are supposed to be vouchers for the gold that they have. And if they don't have it, you get like a run on the banks. Like, oh, you don't actually have your money, like freaking Mary Poppins. Everyone's like, what? You don't have my gold? Having accomplished this intergovernmental loan system along lines that favored U.S. foreign investors and exporters, U.S. diplomats took the lead in drawing up the Charter for an International Trade Organization, ITO, later dropped in favor of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, to sponsor a reduction in world tariffs and to coordinate international commodity agreements. American aid provided Europe with resources for its post-war reconstruction and what appeared in free trade theory to be an improvement in its economic position and efficiency, and more to this point, assured growing markets for U.S. exports. There were no complaints about import dependency, chronic trade, and payment deficits or loss of local autonomy. It all seemed so beautiful on paper. Europe borrowed from the U.S. government and the new international lending agencies to purchase a rising flow of American exports. The result was an average $3.5 billion annual U.S. trade surplus during the 1945 to 50. By the latter year, the United States had achieved its 10 billion export target, right? Like, it wanted 10 billion extra in exports, and it did it. Congratulations. Dividing and conquering at Bretton Woods. This is going to be the last section we have time for today, but hey, I'm having a lot of fun here. The chat has abandoned me, but I am still here. I am still reading. Into the cave, the void I shout. Words! Dividing and conquering at Bretton Woods. The IMF and World Bank were conceived during 1941 to 1945 as the product of joint U.S. and British diplomatic plans for the post-war period. Their articles of agreement were designed to avoid a resumption of the financial problems that had plagued the interwar period, in particular, Keynes to the House of Lords on May 23, 1944, that in the future the external value of sterling shall conform to its internal value as set by our own domestic policies, and not the other way round. I forgot that Keynes was like a living person. He seems like this mythical figure from so long ago. It's like, no, less than 100 years. He was alive. Let me read that again. In the future, the external value of sterling shall conform to its internal value as set by our own domestic policies and not the other way round. Basically, dude, we get to set the value of our currency, not America. This meant that foreign countries in the sterling area would have to adjust their economic policies to those of deficit Britain. Like, you can't just say that sterling is worth more or less in your country to help your exports, because if your stuff is, you'd be like, why would you want to devalue currency? Isn't that bad? Don't you want your currency to be really strong? It's like, when you're on vacation, you want your currency to be strong in the country you are in, but if you're a person trying to sell stuff, you want your currency to be weak, because then they'll go, oh, who's the cheapest? Look at them. Why do we buy stuff from China? Because their currency is relatively weak, therefore, like, anything you buy from them, like, just, you get more for your dollar, literally dollar, in this case, and that can mess up, and that's how you get competitive with your neighbors, like, well, we'll make it even cheaper, capitalism. A proper share of responsibility for maintaining equilibrium in the balance of payments, Keynes continued, is squarely placed on the creditor countries, the people lending the money, the creditor countries, by the IMF's Articles of Agreement, specifically in the Scarce Currency Clause. In its original formulation, this clause called for chronic surplus nations, most obviously the United States, to let their credit balances accumulate with a proposed clearing union until foreign government debts to the union became unmanageably high, at which point these credits would be canceled altogether to free the deficit countries of their obligations. Keynes sounds like fucking like the socialist of all socialists when he's like quoted, when you actually go and read what Keynes said. I'm over here talking like I'm fucking turning Keynesian over here. Like, Keynesian economics aren't actually following Keynes, which is crazy. Michael Hudson over here is like, look, this is what Keynes fucking said, and you need to... You hear what they just said there? In its original formulation, this clause called for chronic surplus nations, obviously the United States, to let their credit balances accumulate with a proposed clearing union until foreign government debts to the union became unmanageably high, at which point these credits would be canceled altogether to free the deficit countries of their obligations. Debt jubilee. Jesus Christ, literally, Jesus H. Christ, the historical, possibly real person, first Sermon on the Mount, motherfuckers. I'm swearing way too much. I'm sorry. It's just Sermon on the Mount. Forgive us our debts. Like, Christ's radical message was a lot about debt forgiveness and like land ownership and stuff, and they've just neutered that entire thing down to just be like, we should all be nice to each other. It's like, it's not what it's about. That's what they try to say that Marxism is about, is just being nice to each other. It's like, I'll go to the Bible church if I want to learn how to be nice to each other. Also, it's really easy. You just fucking love your neighbor as yourself. There you go. You did it. I will hold my God, my God the Father above all gods. Treat my neighbor as, love thy neighbor as you love yourself. There you go. You know how to be nice to people. Or is it, I will have no other gods before you. It's the two. It's the pair. It's like, love God, love your neighbor. Those are his two big fucking things. And it's like, we need to get back to that. I'm a conservative Christian in the sense of like the year 5, that kind of Christian. I'd be right at home in like the year 106 style Christianity, I guess. All right, I lost my place here. In the view of Britain's seemingly permanent payments deficit, its government wished to make large drawings from the planned IMF without incurring indebtedness to specific countries. That would have enabled it to remain free of the political strictures. There's an error. Structures that indebtedness to particular countries would be likely to entail. would be likely to entail. So basically, Keynes is like, hey, I see what's coming here. We got to get out of this. But Washington rejected Keynes' scarce currency clause out of hand. Said that is insane. You would think that we would do that. And neither British officials nor indeed the world was prepared to have the kind of discussion that is happening today, 2021, about the responsibility of creditors to either enable debtors to pay by accepting their exports or writing down the debt. You either let us pay it off or you got to cancel it, man. You can't just do this weird loan shark shit where it's like, no. You still owe us no matter what. We will not allow you to pay off these loans. U.S. negotiators insisted that because currency drawings would be made in U.S. dollars or the currencies of other specific nations, these credits should be denominated in the actual currencies drawn down, not a fiat Bancor credit. Keynes wanted to make up basically a special a currency that's only used for international shit that like no regular people would ever even touch or use. No one would spend or receive money. It's just a ledger system basically. Here's credits and we're just these aren't dollars, these aren't pounds. You can't use devaluation to F with it. These are, he called them Bancors. You could have called them Fruit Loops, anything. Like we need to make up a thing. Imperial credits, whatever. A type of currency only to be used in intergovernment exchange of currencies, so we can like freaking, because something has to get wiped. It's like you said, you either got to like let they get paid off or you got to wipe out debt for things to function, if the purpose is for like the economy to move and do things, not to just sit static and accumulate, which is what it does currently. Where the hell am I reading? Dollar credits would be available to foreign countries only up to the limit of the U.S. subscription tranche. It was never reasonable, observed John H. Williams of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, to suppose that the United States could assent to a scheme under which its liability, in the event of a concentration of world demand upon the dollar, would be limited only to the aggregate size of the clearing union. U.S. representatives to Bretton Woods therefore insisted on a literal fund rather than Keynes like a bank, like the pool of international currencies. A pool of national currencies rather than a blanket overdraft facility, that would be useful if you did that. But Keynes is thinking about an economy that does things and not an economy that is entirely financialized. Financialized meaning just like money and money and money, and there's no shit. You don't make any shit, you just make money, and then the money runs around and touches the other money and becomes more money. Professor Williams provided a succinct contrast between. We're running it down here, people. I'm winding it down. I promise. Professor Williams provided a succinct contrast between the original American white. The guy's name's White. It's not okay. Between the original American White and British Keynes plans of 1943. The White Plan provides for an international stabilization fund. The member countries would deposit their currencies with the fund, which would then undertake to provide the currencies needed by each country to settle its international account. The Keynes Plan provides for an international clearing union to which no funds are deposited. Instead, international payment would be effected by debiting the paying country and crediting the receiving country on the books of the union. The difference was between the U.S. bank deposit principle and the British overdraft practice. By the latter, the clearing union would engage in no exchange operations itself, but merely keep books, which is what the IMF should do. That would be an actual logical purpose for it, not being the world's loan you signed the terms of service. You signed them. You're screwed. You have to sell us all your hospitals now. Not until the United States moved into chronic deficit status on its own current account in the 1960s did it set to work transforming the IMF to create special drawing rights. When the situation stopped benefiting us, we completely flipped our shit, which happens a lot. Like, it'll just invert every once in a while. The whole system will just flip. And it's like, why? Oh, because things changed. Which is why, like, putting hard definitions on, like, well, what is capitalism is when sometimes those very things will invert. Sometimes the U.S. spends a ton of money with the government. Sometimes the U.S. refuses to spend a cent with the government. It just depends on the situation. Socialism isn't when the government does stuff. Here's the government doing a lot of stuff. Look at all this. Not until the United States moved to chronic deficit, special drawing rights, whose principle harked back to Keynes's proposals reflecting the self-interest of payment deficit countries. But a generation earlier, U.S. representatives at Bretton Woods meetings were concerned with the problem of how to foster post-war trade while maintaining gold as the basis for the world monetary order, not with avoiding the rigors of stabilization that so troubled Britain. They presented the IMF and World Bank to Congress on the ground that it was necessary to provide Europe with resources to purchase the targeted $10 billion of U.S. exports. Gotta have our money to buy our stuff. Assistant Secretary of State Dean Acheson testified before Congress, "We have the greatest productive plant in the world. While the rest of the world has been undergoing destruction, we have been building up this plant in order to carry the great burden of the war. One of the problems in the future," oh yes, because we're so self-sacrificial in all of this, the United States, of course. "One of the problems in the future will be to keep that great plant employed and to keep the people employed who are now working in it or who come back from the armed forces. Very well. We all profit by enabling these countries which have been destroyed or which need development to make purchases from those who can produce the goods they need. In this respect, the Bretton Woods Act was a complement to the Employment Act of 1946. In the words of one expert, I think what we put into the fund will represent for all practical purposes with export subsidy. What we put into the fund will represent for all practical purposes an export subsidy. An export subsidy. What was I just talking about? Okay. Without the financial resources of Bretton Woods institutions, the United States would find itself obliged to supply these exports to Europe as outright grants. We want our exports to increase," testified Undersecretary of the Treasury Harry Dexter White. That's the White plan. "But we want other countries to be in a position to pay." Do you? It's so fucking weaselly, all this shit. "They could not be given the peg of anti-Americanism on which to hang any default. A major function of the bank and IMF would be to channel post-war debt payments of the United States without stirring up anti-American resentment. If you put too much crunch on them, like after World War I, America was not popular. We were seen as a loan shark, looming over the world like you all owe us and you better pay. Even though when we were making the loans, we're like, we might not even ask for this money back. France, you helped us out in our war. We're going to help you in your war." And it didn't work that way, man. This concern already had been a major factor leading U.S. officials to propose the Inter-American Development Bank in 1939-40, which kind of just became the IMF. In 1942, the State Department sent Alvin Hansen to London to discuss kindred plans for an international development corporation that might be established upon the return to peace. Shares in the Inter-American Bank were this just like they're describing things just the IMF before the IMF and the World Bank before the World Bank. We eventually got there. Each country was to have a member on the board of directors, and voting was to be in proportion to stockholding, like the fucking bank. The latter condition meant that the United States would be the major financier, the same principle adopted for the World Bank and IMF. In effect, funds would be raised from other countries to promote Latin America's demand for imports, primarily from the United States. Hansen explained that international consultation and cooperation was becoming increasingly necessary in world affairs as a means of dissipating bilateral national antagonisms and rivalries. From this standpoint, a very good case could be made out to change over the American Export-Import Bank to an Inter-American Bank. That would not change the fact that the U.S. government would still have to furnish the funds for other countries to borrow. It would, however, remove any possible argument that the United States was playing Shylock. An Inter-American Bank would promote self-discipline among the members and would relieve the U.S. from alone carrying the onus of securing enforcement of contract. We have to be the world's military, the world's police. We know from past experience that countries have not hesitated to default on bonds issued in American private capital market. See, that's the thing. If we issue a loan and then they default, it's like, well, F you, America, you're bullying us. But if it's like our bank and we make a loan, like me, Nicaragua, we make a deal together. Why you no pay the deal? Why I become Italian in this in this hypothetical situation? Because then it's harder to be like, oh, the U.S. is sticking this on us. Because we'll be like, no, you are in the bank, and you signed, and you agreed. Terms of service. We're terms of servicing the entire world to our freaking will over here. We know from past experience that countries have not hesitated to default on bonds issued in the American private capital market. To be sure, they are likely to be more reluctant to default on loans made by the American Export-Import Bank, and... Indeed... Oh, am I like... Sorry, I'm checking how close I am to the end of this chapter. I'm not going to be able to finish it. We're already over time. And indeed, the record of those loans is incontestable. You can't frickin' say we're loan sharking you if you agreed to be loan sharked. they would still be more reluctant to default on bonds that they and their neighbors helped to underwrite. In It's so shisty, man. In Britain's parliamentary debate of December 12th to 13th, 1945, Alfred Edwards had complained that the aim of full employment was only for the U.S. labor force, not that of Britain. The only way to pay the American credits, he emphasized in the spirit of Keynes's argument regarding German reparations in the 1920s, was to let Britain earn the dollars and other hard currency by exporting. But it hardly seemed likely that in 5 years hence, with the British loan repayments were to begin, that Britain would get a positive response when it asked the Americans, will you kindly let us have a schedule of the goods you require to be offered next year in repayment? Which basically, hey, you want to just be a cool guy? It's like, the Americans are never a cool guy. That's not how this works. This is business. It was not believable that the Americans would then turn around and accept a trade deficit given the export-oriented emphasis of their policy of full employment. Basically, we have the same exclusionary goal from each other. We can't both have full employment. In addition to providing foreign countries with purchasing power to buy U.S. exports, the Bretton Woods meeting also lay the groundwork for freer trade. The IMF's Articles of Agreement required its signatories to not enter into bilateral monetary agreements or other forms of protectionism, save for the sterling area, which was to be left intact, for now. This principle established the foundations for what was to become the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT. In the words of the Secretary of the Treasury, Morgenthau, there we go, who acted as chairman of the U.S. delegation to Bretton Woods, because it offers a method for stabilizing currencies, the monetary fund removes the excuse for the tangle of import quotas, discriminatory tariffs, and other disparate measures, which added so many difficulties to the friendly economic relations between nations in the 30s. We were also friendly in the 30s. Supplying Europe with credit to purchase American exports would enable Europe to reconstruct its economies within the context of political stability. Unless something is done, one banker testified, it is my belief that you are going to have a continuing chaotic condition in those countries, and they will inevitably go on to some form of totalitarian government, simply because it will be the only way that their people can get food to eat. Oh, the thing I said a little while ago. Out of desperation, motherfuckers start turning to communism, because it works. Sorry, I want to stop reading, but now I'm getting viewers. What's going on, everybody? We have a chat. Say something in the chat. I've been reading for like an hour, and I'm about to be done, but I highly recommend Super Imperialism by Michael Hudson. Super Imperialism is the book. The author is Michael Hudson, the world's greatest living economist, and the only guy who understands Marxism. He's not a Marxist. It's really funny because he's not a big commie, but it's like, this is like, if you read Capital and you're like, well, what now? Everything is so different since the 18 whatevers. Get on Super Imperialism. It explains everything. Like, why is America how it is? Why is the world economy how it is? It takes you all the way through it. It makes sense. It's not, you're not too dumb to get it. I'm not too dumb to get it. I'm freaking stupid, and I can read these books. It's possible. What the heck? Where are we here? And I think that if such a thing, turning to some form of totalitarian government simply because it will be the only, it will be the only way that their people can get food to eat. And I think that if such a thing happened, apart from the destruction of any possibility of increase in foreign trade, it would increase military and naval expenditures on the part of the United States that would cost us far more than any possible risk that is involved in our contribution to the fund. Chaotic economic conditions in a country produce civil wars, and civil wars are apt to produce wars between nations. As Senator Milliken paraphrased this thought, as you have an increase in totalitarianism, which is what they call communism, our own military risks increase. Therefore, we have to spend more for armament and so forth. Yes, the banker responded, without currency stabilization, you won't have any great volume of foreign trade, and you will have very heavily increased military expenditures. America's IMF subscription thus represented a subsidy designed to, among other things, dampen the risk of repeating the hyperinflation and political dislocations that had disrupted Europe in the 1920s. Well, everybody, I've got to cut it. Actually, how close am I to the end of this chapter? We're only many, many pages. I hope it inspires you to read more of this book, because, every page you hear I'm just, breaking into yelling. because not that much has really changed. You can look at the moves that are getting made back in the 40s, really back in like as early as the 1910s, because this book starts way the heck back up at frickin'. Oh, look, we got charts. there's charts in the introduction. There's charts. Birth of the American World Order, he traces back to like 1917, 1946. Your World War I's, when that's gearing up. The financial mechanizations that made everything else possible started then. Why? Because Europe was having a big war. We weren't really part of it, and then we move in as the like, hey, buddy, you want some money? We started making loans, and then began the gradual and ever forward marching progress of American ownership of just so much of the world. Because like, how do you... Oh, you can't afford to pay our stuff back? Well, that's fine. Just let us buy some of your stuff within your country and run some of your industries. Oh, you got a nice like power plant over there. What if Americans owned it? Oh, cool. We'll sell you that. Will that knock off a little bit of our debt? It's like, kind of not really. Like, you'll sell it to us and you'll still owe us somehow even more than before because of like interest and all these other various nonsense freaking... It's like the kind of stuff they do to us, the normal consumer, trying to exist financially in the world, but they're doing it to entire national economies. Dozens, hundreds of national economies have just been made entirely subservient to U.S. interest. And how have we done it? This book will tell you. Super Imperialism by Michael Hudson, the world's coolest economist. He's like 90 years old. He still does interviews, doing his best, man. And he now talks a little bit like a slightly... He's like good universe RFK, both in like appearance and the slight roughness of his voice. All right. Goodbye, everybody. I like you all. I hope you have a good one. Mwah.